Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Political No Brainer, the podcast where we move past winner takes all politics and into real conversations. I'm Jeff Rabinowitz, and this season we're bringing in voices from all sides to challenge assumptions, bridge divides, and build a better understanding of today's biggest issues. And today, I am excited to be joined with Alan Hayes, Lake County Supervisor of Elections, and you've had quite the career before that. You're a dentist, you were a Florida State House representative, a Florida Senate representative, and now you're the Lake County Super of Elections. So why don't you tell us about we already talked. I want to tell everybody we already had a great conversation, so I'm real prepared for this one. So how about telling us about your career as a dentist? I remember you told me a really important story about our hygiene, health, and how that got twisted and turned into a political rendezvous about fluoride in the water. So I would love to hear all that first.
Well, Jeff, I got introduced to dentistry as a profession when I was a dental assistant in my 4 years of Coast Guard service. And I enjoyed it so much then, I said to my wife, I said, let's go to dental school and see what we can do. So that's exactly what we did. I finished dental school and was looking for a small town somewhere in the state of Florida that needed a dentist. And I found one and moved there, opened a practice, and just had a great time for 27 years, providing dental services there to the folks in that community and surrounding areas. Then sold the practice, thinking I was going to go into semi-retirement and work 2 days a week. And in dentistry, they're in that same practice in the wintertime, and go up to North Carolina and spend the summers there in the mountains where it's nice and cool all summer long. And I just had a grand plan, but then the good Lord interfered with that, and the friends convinced me that I needed to run for the House of Representatives. And I said, "You guys are crazy." I said, "There's no way I'd ever be elected." I said, I'm very opinionated. I'm quite blunt. I'm politically incorrect. I'm not interested in changing." And they said, "Alan, those are the reasons we want you to run." So I ran, and believe it or not, from the day of the decision to run, and there are already 4 candidates in the race. But from that day of decision to the day of the election was only 10 weeks. And I won that election. I served 6 years in the House. Then I moved over to the Senate for 6 more years. And in 2016, this position came open. My predecessor had held the elected position of supervisor for 44 years. And her
Wow.
daughter to her says, "Mom, you're not going to run for reelection. You're 90 years old." So she stepped aside, and I came in, and the voters chose to put me in charge of the elections here. And I've been here now for 8 years and just got reelected to 4 more years. And really, I tell everybody, and I mean it sincerely, I have the privilege of being the head coach of a team of champions. The men and women that I get to come to work with every day here are dedicated to excellence in elections administration. And we don't care whether you have any political affiliation whatsoever. We don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, or any other minor party. We frankly don't care. We want to make sure that every eligible voter is registered, and every registered voter hopefully will take the time to inform themselves about the candidates and the issues that are on their ballot, so that the decisions they're making, the votes that they're casting, are informed decisions. And then our pledge to them is to make sure that those choices are counted accurately and timely and reported accurately as well. So that's it. Of course, there's a whole lot more goes on in the world of elections than just election day and the early voting periods. It is quite an involved thing. I found out when I took this position how little I knew about elections administration, even as a legislator. The legislators just don't know anything at all about the administration of elections. They know how to win them, and I won every one of them that I entered. But boy, it's a completely different game when you start administering those elections.
Well, there's two things to unpack here. And one thing, again, like I said, referring to our first conversation, Lake County, Florida is the gold standard of election results, of election counting, however you want to call it, election processing. And I'd love you to talk about that because, like you said, I strongly believe Florida. And then when I talked to you, you said nobody does it better than Lake County in Florida. So you're either equal to Lake County or Lake County's better. But if that were the case, how do we implement? I mean, tell us what you do, and isn't it something we should be looking at to do in all 50 states?
Well, without any apology, yes, I would say that it is something that they ought to be doing in all 50 states. One of the beauties of our U.S. Constitution, though, is that the states get to decide how they're going to run their elections. And I think that that needs to be kept intact. When I took over, I sat down with my team and we agreed that we would make 4 commitments to the people of Lake County. First and foremost is voter confidence. That's our number one priority. We want those people to know they can have confidence in the integrity of this office and how everything is being run here. We're going to be completely compliant with all the statutes and with all the rules that apply to the administration of these elections. Point number 2 is excellent customer service. We want them to be able to call us, use us as your authority, your knowledgeable source of information. If you hear rumors and all that sort of stuff, pay no attention to it, call us. We'll tell you the straight story, and we won't put you on hold for 20 minutes and hope you call back and all that nonsense that you get so many times.
Now, I can vouch for that because I have called your office on numerous occasions and I've gotten some of the best customer service. I literally recently just called about running for city council. A lady took at least 20 minutes to explain to me that my particular seat will be available next year. But I mean, there was a lot of conversation and she was generous with her time. She gave me all the information I needed. And that's just one example of, I don't know if you know, Alan, but I've called your office many times over the years. And I can honestly say, I've gotten great service every time. So I just wanted to interject that and then let you go on.
Well, thank you. That we get that same feedback frequently from different people that do appreciate it, and they notice the difference. Then our third commitment is accurate and efficient elections, and then we have the fourth commitment is responsible financial stewardship. And to that end, we have what we do when we're putting together our budget is we plan for the worst case scenario, and then we execute for the best possible. I tell everybody, plan for the worst and pray for the best is what it boils down to. But by managing our funds appropriately, we've been able to return to the county commission over the 8 years that I've been in office, almost $4 million that we did not use. And I don't believe in this idea of at the end of the fiscal year, well, if you have money left over, go spend it. No, we don't do that. We make sure that we manage that money in a way that will honor the integrity of the system and the respect of the voters. That's what we do. Florida is the gold standard. There are many other counties in Florida that run their elections just as good as we do here in Lake County. In that sense, we're not a standout. I say that, but also add quickly that in the 2024 election, Lake County had the highest percentage of voter turnout of any county in the state that had over 200,000 voters. We had 90% of our registered voters came out and voted in 2024 in that presidential election. And people say, well, how in the world did you ever get 90%? Well, it wasn't by accident. It was intentional. For the last 8 years, we have had a community outreach program. We've been in all the schools for voter registration. We don't just hand out forms and collect them and go home. We have a little voter education program connected with that voter registration drive in the high schools each year. We also participate in a lot of different community activities. We go to different civic events and festivals and things like that. We put up our tent. We have full service there. People can come in and change their address. They can change their party registration if they want to. Any number of things that we provide for them there at these events. And our objective is to make sure that the people of Lake County are familiar with our office all year long. It's not a matter of just wait until the election's rolling around and then all of a sudden turn up the heat and say, oh, hurry, 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 hurry. No, we like to make sure that people have an understanding and they know where to go for reliable information. And So I think all of that, back to that number one commitment, voter confidence. I tell everybody, I say, the voters did not come out and vote because I'm so good looking. They came out and voted because they know the level of service that our team is providing. We hire every election 800 to 900 poll workers that have to go through the statutory training. They're very diligent. They're very hardworking. They come there at 6 a.m. every election day, and they work until at least 7:30 or 8 o'clock that night. It's a long, long day for them, but they're dedicated to excellence in everything they do. And they're a vital part of our whole operation. We could not do it without them. So it's definitely a team effort, and the results have paid off quite handsomely. So we're very, very, very fortunate here.
So voter confidence, let's get into that for a minute. I asked you in your office before we had this conversation, was there any legitimacy to the argument that that voter confidence shouldn't have been there in certain elections? That there was a presidential election that we heard about for 4 years straight, and I can honestly say that recently we facilitated the peaceful transfer of power. We acknowledged the loss, but when that certain feeling was that the election wasn't handled in an upstanding way, was there any reason to believe any of those allegations?
Jeff, I can only speak to that which I know. And I know firsthand in Lake County and in Florida, there was no reason to suspect any kind of wrongdoing in any of our recent elections, including the 2020 presidential election. I saw on TV, national media, the same pictures that everyone else saw. And in some of those other states, I saw what was portrayed as activities that gave me real pause for suspicion that there was something shady going on. I've said many times that the biggest tragedy of the 2020 election was not which candidate won or which candidate lost. The biggest tragedy of that election was the undermining of the confidence in our system in the minds of the voters. And what I would have prescribed to solve all this is to immediately impound all of the evidence on election night or the day after to say, we've got to lock it down. We're going to do a thorough investigation, and we're going to see if our suspicions come true. And if they're not, there's a scripture passage says in John 8:32 said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I have found in my entire life, whether it's been the practice of dentistry or as a legislator or here in the elections world, if you tell people the truth, they will respect you, number one. They may not like the truth, but at least they know it's true and they can deal with the truth. It's the suspicion of lies, or it's the innuendo, or it's the partial truth, and this and that and the other. Well, as far as I'm concerned, a partial truth is a whole lie. And so just tell the truth. If you're truthful with the people, they can understand. They may not understand it, they may not like it, but at least they can accept it, and you have earned their respect. And that to me is what was missing, is there was so much suspicion and so many lies that were told about that election that it really undermined the confidence of a lot of people.
But hopefully that confidence is back now, because like you said, there was. So even in Florida, for example, we talked about this, and you actually had specific numbers and specific processes. Long before the 2020 election, there was a contested election. And it was a national election, a presidential election that was decided by, and you said the number, and I may get it wrong, at 516 votes. It was Florida. What was it, 500?
537.
537.
Yeah.
There was that suspicion there, but then you explained it to me best that the systems in place addressed that the Secretary of State had a job to do, and she did it according to the laws of the state, and the conclusion was final right then and there, and it was what it was. So just explain that to me.
Well, the 2000 election, Florida's election system was the laughing stock of the world. We made headlines all over the world, literally, for several weeks while that determination was being completed. And there were several shortcomings. I was not in the elections world at that time. I was still practicing dentistry. So I can't speak from firsthand knowledge, but based on what I've learned since then and since I got involved in the elections, there were several weaknesses there, not the least of which was that punch card ballot method where the voter took a little stylus and punched a hole in the ballot. And then that card was read by a machine. And that was where you had the hanging chad because the hole was not punched cleanly through the paper and all that. But anyhow, after that election, the supervisors sat down with the legislators and started working to refine our statutes, our whole system. And today we're the beneficiaries of all their hard work. They worked like crazy for 18 years. And in the 2018 election, we had 3 statewide recounts. We had to recount the U.S. Senate race, we had to recount the governor's race, and to recount the Commissioner of Agriculture race. And all 3 of those recounts turned out to be the same result as the original count was. So that clearly told the people of Florida that, yes, our system is accurate, it's up to date, and we're doing great things. So we've had an excellent record of administration of the elections ever since then. But there are ways that mistakes can happen. I'm sure that if anybody was set on doing wicked things, evil things, in some of the states, they could find it. But here in Florida, we have checks, we have rechecks, and everything. I mean, all the things that we go through here seem like exhaustive steps, but we know how many ballots we have printed. We know how many ballots are distributed to each polling place. We know how many ballots are issued to the voters. If a voter messes up one and they bring it back, they can get another one. It's called a spoil ballot. We know how many of those are there. And at the end of the day, we balance our books just like a bank teller balances their cash drawer at the end of the day in banking. And every one of those ballots is accounted for. We never leave voted ballots in a polling place overnight. All of the ballots are returned to our office from every early voting site each evening. The chain of custody is written. We know who picked it up. First, we know who put the ballots in the box. We know what machine that came from that went in the box. We know who that person was and how many ballots were in there. We know who transported those ballots. We always have 2 people transporting ballots, never somebody alone. We log them in when they come here, which box number it was, which people brought it in, which people logged it in. And I mean, it's just on and on and on. I could sit here till dark tonight talking about all the different points of balance that we have and verification, not the least of which is our independent automated audit system. What we do now is every single race in every precinct is compared, our tabulation results with our audit system results. You have 2 separate systems that have scanners that are manufactured by different people, different companies, and consequently you don't expect them obligation to be identical in the way they read the marks on the ballot. So there's some allowance for deviation there. But when you have 200,000 ballots cast,
and just Lake County,
just in Lake County, and the deviation between any given race is 9 votes or fewer, that tabulation system is exceptionally accurate, and that's exactly what we have. I mean, it's an excellent check. It's very quick. It's prompt. It's right there, and it's completely accurate. So we're very transparent. We intentionally build our buildings so that they have big glass windows in the walls. If people are so inclined, they can come in and watch while the ballots are being processed and tabulated and all. I mean, it's a very transparent operation in every sense.
And it by far is the greatest system in the world. There is all this concern, though, and I'm not blaming it on one person by any means, but by talking to you, I think it alleviates a lot of the concern. But you made a great point in our first conversation about voters getting to know who they're voting for, not just voting down the line, red or blue. And then I made the point that we're literally in this particular last presidential election, I believe the two candidates raised and spent $3 billion. And I just made the the thinking out loud comment. It could have been better spent at St. Jude's Children's Hospital. I mean, I don't need a billboard that's costing a candidate $4,000 a week to tell me who to vote for. I am going to go online and research that candidate. And so that being said, I also suggested not to build my own platform, but I said candidates should do podcasts, should do radio shows, should really get out there and talk to the community, should post on their website exactly how they feel about the most pressing issues of the day, even in sort of a candidate blog. And more people should get involved in taking advantage of all that. But we've gotten to this instant system in America where you get a postcard in the mail, or you drive by a billboard that says no tips for waiters and waitresses, and you're like, that's my guy. But go on and talk about how people should really get to know their candidates versus just the nonsense that they're publishing in snippets.
Well, one of the first comparisons that comes to mind is a marriage. I don't know very many people that go get married on a whim and just somebody that they just met yesterday that say, hey, come on, let's go get married. No, most people will meet someone, they'll date someone after they've gotten acquainted with them. Sometimes it's a blind date or something, but regardless, my whole point is there's a period of courtship in most instances before somebody goes and gets married. And then once they get married, they have to work at that relationship. They have to build understanding and exchange ideas. Things like this just continue as they did during that courtship to exchange their ideas. Well, a political candidate is much the same way. And your point about doing the podcast and doing the other, taking advantage of the methods of communication that we have at our fingertips today is so critical. And people need to take the time to delve into the track record of this person. What have they done prior to running for office? Or if it's an incumbent, what have they done while they're in office? And I'm not talking just about how much money have they brought back to the district, but what bills did they take the lead on? What debates did they participate in? It's something that is the results of that election are going to affect your life every day. People tend to discount municipal elections, and that's one of the biggest tragedies, I think, of our society today. People need to understand those city commissioners are making decisions that affect your life every day, more so than the ones in Washington, D.C. So you really need to get to know the guys that you're voting for and the ones you're sending to Tallahassee, but certainly the ones you're sending to City Hall, and learn what they stand for philosophically and ideologically is important. But more important than the ideology is specific issues. Are you going to vote for this? You're going to vote for that? What have you done in your past that indicates your behavior for the future? And it's not easy. It's not real quick necessarily, but you need to be very conscientious in your exploration of the candidates. Also look on issues. You have constitutional amendments, you have charter amendments, you have referenda in the local areas and everything. You need to find out what the net effect of those propositions is going to be. It sounds good, it looks good, but when you peel that onion back, there may be a rotten spot in the onion somewhere, and you need to know about that. We had an Amendment 4 here several years ago that sounded good on the surface about setting aside a certain amount of money from real estate transactions to be used to buy land for public use, environmentally sensitive land, and that sort of stuff. What they failed to tell the voters, that the amendment passed, incidentally, but there's a couple of things they failed to tell the voters. Number one, at the time of the proposal, And going forward, already more than 33% of the land mass of Florida was already in conservation lands. Every acre that you take and put into conservation takes income off the private property tax rolls. So you're going to pay money to put that land in conservation purposes, and then you're going to reduce your revenue coming into the government. And yet most people are wanting more services from the government. So what's the real effect of putting that land in conservation? And when already more than a third of your state is in conservation land, how much is enough? I mean, we could go on and on. There's just so many things that we need to learn about the different issues. And I just use that as one example.
Well, that's a great example. And the amendment thing is a great example. And I'm just going to say this to everybody. If you decide to get a ballot, a sample ballot, before you decide to vote, and you research the amendments, because just like you said, there was numerous amendments on this last election. And those who are in favor make it sound great. And those who are opposed make it sound awful. And that's what you're reading on those billboards, is those snippets. And
Yep.
and that's all that people are reading, and then they're voting for it according to either. So just say those who love it are in the red and those who hate it are in the blue, and then you get back to the red and blue down the line. But you really need to open that amendment and look at it, just like you said. You've got 33% of the state already under conservation watch. So that means 30%. Okay, so that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad percentage, I don't think. But increasing it to 40 or 50% becomes an issue because, like you said, you're reducing the revenue coming into Tallahassee, and then you're wondering why your tax bill's going up. And the reality is you're never connecting the dots because you're not really an informed voter. You're like, oh my God, last year I paid $2,200 in property tax. This year it's $3,800. Well, the revenue was significantly reduced. The county still grew. They needed more police officers. They needed more schools. The money doesn't magically appear. So there's all that slippery slope that goes on, and that's where voter education comes in. And that's like when I talk about things like I think in time we're going to do like a tutorial podcast that we're going to offer for people to watch voluntarily, but talk about amendments. You know, it's just important that you understand both sides of the amendment. And the last bunch were really complicated. And I'm not exactly sure if anybody knew what they were voting for other than me, my wife, and a few people that call me often enough that I get to talk to them long enough and tell them, look, here's the two sides. I like it because, but remember the flip side is this. But there's so much education we need to do and offer to voters. Just like you said, you do educational stints at the schools, and when a young voter is registered at a young age, if they vote at a young age, they're more inclined to be lifelong voters, significantly more inclined to be lifelong voters if they start at a young age. And that's an important thing your office is doing. And I would love to see every office do that. Now, I always say, I am a part of the Democratic Party, but they also argue moot points. So the one moot, I don't know that it's a moot point, but the SAVE Act, I'm asking you. The SAVE Act is in Congress now. It's a moot point simply because it probably will never come to fruition, because it literally takes a giant threshold in the Senate to become a law. It literally takes like 60 Senate votes. I don't think we'll ever get to 60 Senate votes, even on what kind of pizza they want to eat. Forget about an act like the SAVE Act. But it says, and I'm asking you, if you literally had a certain percentage of Florida residents have to come to your office and produce proof of citizenship to be able to be registered voters, would that cause you the need to hire a lot more people in your office?
Well, as they've said so many times about so many different things, the devil is in the details.
Right.
And I haven't found very many people that think someone who's not a citizen should be voting. I ask you, if my wife and I come to your house and start telling you and your wife how to run your household, you're going to look at me and say, "Hey, get out of here. This is none of your business." If you're one of our Rabinowitz family, then we welcome that participation and that discussion. But until you become one of us, go back where you came from. And our Constitution says that only U.S. citizens are to vote. And these local organizations and local municipalities that have allowed non-citizens to vote, I think, are in violation of that Constitution. One of the things that really, really hurts our American society today, on both sides, regardless of any political affiliation or lack thereof, is the lack of information and lack of familiarity with our U.S. Constitution. And our founding fathers, I believe it was John Adams, but don't quote me on that. But anyhow, one of them said that it's our obligation as citizens, and I fully agree with this, to study the Constitution, to know about the Constitution, and to defend the Constitution so that we know what our rights are and we can assert our rights. And, for years, I felt like that Washington was extending their tentacles too deeply into our local government. And I knew that the 10th Amendment clearly states that the only powers given to Congress are those specifically enumerated in that document, or the powers that the states may have ceded to Congress in later years. So I was proposing what I called the 10th Amendment Revolution. We, the legislature of Florida, should send a letter to the Congress saying, we, the sovereign state of Florida, have not given you this power over us, and the Constitution doesn't give it to you. Thus, we are no longer going to abide by your seizing that power from us. We're going to assert our sovereign rights as the state of Florida. Then I found out there's a better way to do that, and that's called an Article 5 constitutional amendment. When the founders were putting together the Constitution, they were almost within the last week of finalizing the document. And George Mason stood up and said, wait just a minute here. Do you really think that, and this goes all the way back into the 1700s, so some things haven't changed at all. Do you really think that if a group of people in Congress are given this much power, they're going to just willingly give it up? I think not. He says we have to put something in this Constitution that will give the people the power to change that Constitution. So they had already Article 1, Section 1 of Article 5, which said that if the different houses of Congress agree on an amendment, they can propose it to the states, and then if 3/4 of the states agree on it, it becomes part of the Constitution. Well, George Mason said, no, we need to let the states be able to initiate the amendment process. So they put Section 2 of Article 5 in that says if 2/3 of the states petition Congress for a convention of states, then the Congress shall convene that convention. Then the states get to meet and they formulate the proposed amendments. Those amendments then are disseminated to the different states, and if 3/4 of the state legislatures agree to those amendments, then that amendment becomes part of the Constitution. We've never had amendments that way, but there is a movement going on right now called the Convention of States that would go a long way. We have, I think the last time I heard, there were something like 17 or 18 states that had agreed. The legislatures had sent their petition to Congress, and they need a total of 32 states to petition Congress to get the convention going. So there's a lot of work yet to be done on that. But my whole point is we as citizens need to know what that Constitution says and the rights that we have as citizens. And we need to make sure that only U.S. citizens are the ones that are voting in our elections.
Absolutely. 100% absolutely. Only U.S. citizens be able to vote, and that's where the SAVE Act comes in. But my question is now, because I love the way you clarified everything, my question is now, do you feel that, and let's just speak for Florida, because like you said, you can only talk about what you know. Do you feel that there is an issue with illegals voting in Florida?
My personal thought is, number one, I know there are some illegal people that have been registered in Florida because I've had two of them come to me since I've been in office here, which is an 8-year period. And they said, look, please take my name off the voter roll. One of them was a little old lady who we suspect wanted her voter identification card to be used as a identification so she could get homestead exemption. She was not a U.S. citizen, but she lied on the application and she was registered. Some way, somehow, she got through the system. What happens is when a voter applicant fills out that application for registration, we take the application, we send it to Tallahassee, and they have access to the various databases to verify the citizenship. And some way, somehow, that lady got through the morass of databases and was authorized. She never did vote. But the reason she wanted her name taken off was because she was applying for U.S. citizenship. And one of the questions on that application asked, are you registered to vote and have you voted? Well, she wanted to be able to answer that question honestly. And so she had us take her name off so she could say, no, she's not registered, and no, she had not voted. We had another one, a young man who apparently filled his application out at one of the school registration things. And unfortunately, he had voted, and I think in 2 different elections, but nevertheless, we took his name off as well. So I say all that simply to say there are some who get through the system. Is the system screening mechanism perfect? No. Like any other things that humans do, it's not perfect, but it's highly reliable. I'm not aware of any large number of non-citizens that are here. Please do not interpret my comment to imply that it's not a problem. I very strongly feel that we should make every effort to make certain, to every degree that we can, that only U.S. citizens are registered to vote, and they're the only ones who do vote. That's an imperative where I come from, and we're gonna do everything we can to make sure if we find somebody that is not a citizen, that is registered, or has voted, or has any other way misrepresented things on that voter registration application, we turn it over to the state attorney and to the Office of Election Crimes and Security in Tallahassee and let them prosecute it. We as supervisors don't have any prosecutorial administration. Matter of fact, the statutes are very clear. We are simply here to accept the documents, make sure that all the blanks are filled out, but we don't have the authority to investigate to see whether they're truthful or not.
So, and I'm not going to make the ignorant statement saying you're 8 years, you've seen 2. There's more than 2, and it does need to be vetted, and it does need to be but for the most part, the system in place, and it can always be improvements, really does, and we're speaking for Florida, really does work. And it's really, so let me give you an example. When during the election, I was getting emails and calls. They haven't counted all the votes, and they're calling the states for Trump. And I'm like, but you have to realize that what they haven't counted yet are counties that are going to go Trump's way. They're extremely conservative counties. It's easy enough to come to a conclusion at this point in time that he has won this state. And there's people that are just conspiracy driven. And I always want to interview people like you that say, put the conspiracies aside. Realize the system in place is really a great one. And the election is, and the free election, the American system, I call it, I think Warren Buffett calls it the lucky gene pool that we live in. It's put all those conspiracies aside. I don't think there's ever been a stolen election in America. I do think immigrants vote. I do think illegal immigrants vote. I don't think there's this mass quantity because they feel Trump is going to be tough on immigration and Kamala is going to be easy on immigration. I don't see the conspiracy there. It's like you said, a child that was enrolled in a high school program didn't realize he was not entitled to vote yet. He accidentally voted. And then he was taken off the voter rolls until he was eligible to go back and be put back on the voter rolls. So our systems in place really work, is my point.
The system does work very well. The system is not perfect. And I would encourage anybody who has knowledge of wrongdoing bring that to the attention of your local supervisor of elections. We had a group here in Lake County that brought us a stack of paper probably that thick of alleged violators of the law. And there was 2 or 3 different allegations that they made, but it's quite a large list of people. And I frankly had grown weary of listening to all of their allegations and their conspiracy theories and all this stuff. And I said, look, it's time for you people to either put up or shut up, one of the two. And so they brought me that stack of paper, like I was telling you. And we went through every single one of them. We found only one person who had violated the law, and it had absolutely nothing to do with Lake County. That person had voted legitimately by mail here in Lake County. They then went to Duval County and tried to vote in person, but they didn't have an identification card. So appropriately, the poll workers there gave the voter a provisional ballot, and then when that provisional ballot got back to the office, they failed to check to make sure that they had not voted in any other county, and their canvassing board voted to accept that ballot. And that was where she made the mistake. That was the crime that she had committed. And that's the only one out of that whole stack. People need to understand there are many, many intricacies in our election statutes. And one of the things that we guard very jealously, the system is set up to protect your right to vote and to protect your registration, so that we can't just come in on a whim and start deleting people because they didn't vote. There's a very prescribed process that we have to go through several steps when people have not voted in the last 2 general elections. And we send them notification, and if we don't get back, then we do this, we do that. There's a long string of events that has to take place before we first put them on inactive status. That's not removing them from the polling rolls. It's just putting them on inactive status. The only thing necessary for them to become active once again is for them to show up to vote, or them to come in here to our office or give us a phone call or something like that to show some activity on their record, and they're automatically restored to active status. And yet, you know, the conspiracy theorists don't understand all these nuances of the law. And it's, you know, they're far too detailed for us to go into something like that on a podcast. You just have to know that we're doing it the right way.
But I'll tell you this, because I did have a person say to me, I haven't voted, and then there was the whole discussion of just these evil Florida lawmakers vetting people and taking them off the voter rolls. I said, if you haven't voted in a while, call. I was there in their house. Call. And your office picked up and said, yes, you are no longer an active, but they fixed it right there on the phone. So, and it makes perfect sense that sooner or later, if you have too many inactive voters on the voter rolls, you stand a chance of more mistakes than if you actually have active voters, a high ratio of active voters on your voter rolls. So it's a good idea to have that process where if you're just simply not showing up to vote, you shouldn't be on the list. And if all you have to do is call to fix it, what's the issue?
Well, Jeff, another thing that people need to understand is there is no law that requires you to vote. So we can't just take you off the roll because you didn't vote in the last 2 years or the last 4 years without going through the prescribed process. But people need to understand that we have in place signature verification for every single vote by mail ballot that comes back to us. We have in place the voter identification card, photo ID that must be presented if you're going to vote in person, whether it's early voting or election day. So there are several fail-safe mechanisms in place in the system that the people there, when you vote, it's you, the live person. Does that picture on that ID match your face? Does all the other information on that identification match your voter record, the address, the date of birth, things like that? So we're checking all the time. And for the vote by mail, people talk about, oh, vote by mail and absentee voting. It's all the same thing, just spelled differently. Um, and they said, well, that's the easy place to cheat. Well, it's not quite as easy as you might think, because we compare the signature on that return envelope with the signature in that voter's record. And if it doesn't match, now let me back up. Every single person that evaluates the matching signatures in our office is required by law to complete a 2-hour course online about signature matching. So they have gone through the training, and I tell every one of my people, I said, listen, no matter which way you adjudicate, whether you accept or you reject that signature, I want you to be able to defend that decision in a court of law. So don't just accept it because it's there. Don't reject it because you don't like something about it or whatever. You make sure that if ever a judge says, explain to the court why you accepted that signature or explain why you rejected it, you can give them specific reasons for your action, you know. So it's a very strenuous process that we go through to verify that signature on that return envelope. And that's just the way we do it. It's got to have a date on it. There's just a lot of different fail-safe mechanisms built into it that people don't understand, and they sometimes believe the conspiracies.
So let's talk about verification. You just said they're required to watch a 2-hour course, right? If they're a verifier, let's just call them a verifier, a signature verifier.
Right.
I own a medical waste business. Anybody handling biological waste, dentist offices, has to watch a 10-minute YouTube video according to the state, and then you can handle medical waste. You can handle toxic waste, medical waste with a 10-minute. We are literally requiring our signature verifiers in the state of Florida, our voter signature, a 2-hour course. And like you said, the reason being is because if they do stand in front of a judge with a ballot that they refused, they can explain to that judge that this is why I refused it. This is a check and balance of just enormous efficiency. And yet you still have, and that's what frustrates me, is because I get the calls on election days and during special elections, and I get the emails and I get the texts, and I'm like, especially Florida, but the truth of the matter is, for the most part, states follow the rules. And then there was there's this vague or there's this isolated argument. I'm gonna give you an example. It's just pointing something. In Texas, apparently, for a long time, a weapons carrying permit was a valid form of ID to vote, but a state issued personal identification was not, whereas a driver's license, of course, was. And the reason being is because lower income people are more inclined to have a state issued identification card than they are to have a gun carrying permit. And it's like, yes, these are some technicalities. And like you said, the state has the right to make those rules. We can't pass laws to override a rule like that for all 50 states when it's not even in place in all 50 states. So there are these vague issues with voting. But for the most part, talking to Alan Hayes, the Supervisor of Elections in one of the greatest systems in the state, in the country, the system's okay, right?
The system is very, very solid. And a significant part of that 2-hour online course is the identification of 8 separate points of comparison on that signature. Things such as, does the signature that is in that voter record match the signature on that return envelope by the signature's position relative to the line on which it was written? Is it written on the line? Is it written above the line? Is it written below the line? Does the initial stroke of the signature, in your case, the J, how is that stroke look compared to the 2 signatures? The final stroke on that Z on the end of your name, what's that final stroke look like? The whole slope of your signature, does it go up from left to right, or does it go down from left to right? The slope of the letters themselves. I mean, like I say, there are 8 different things that we compare before we decide that is or is not a valid signature.
And that's just great to know, because I'm going to say it. I tell Democrats, stop worrying about the process, just freaking vote. So the one thing is, And another thing I want to bring up. So recently, everybody's vote by mail has expired. So I'm telling everybody, not just Democrats, not you need to re-up your. As just as a precaution, if you are the person that will stand in line with 6 bottles of water, you may be like me. When one election came about, it was during COVID, and I was getting called into work at random. So every time I tried going to the voter a long line, I really didn't have time. I had to get ready for work, so I had that voter by mail option, and I voted by mail one time, and I think it was an email or a letter I got back verifying my mail voting was received and accounted for. Is that, you do a sort of a verification notice, right? When you get a vote by
Yeah.
mail?
Well, what we do is we encourage our voters to sign up for a program called Ballot Tracks, and they get to choose their method of notification, whether it's by email, text message, or a phone call, or all three of the above, or any of the combination thereof. It's up to the voter. We don't impose it on them. It's free to the voter. It doesn't cost them anything. But that system lets them know that we have mailed the ballot to them so they can expect to find it in their post office box or delivered to their home. It also lets them know when we have received the ballot coming back. And if there are any issues with the signature not matching, it informs the voter of that too. They're notified right away. As soon as our inspector clerks hit that rejected button, then the ballot track system automatically notifies that voter, your signature has been rejected, and here's what you need to do to verify, to get that signature, we call it cured, so that we can accept your ballot. It's a very, very good system. And we go out of our way to make sure, to the greatest degree possible and legally, that every vote is counted. We take no pleasure in rejecting ballots, but when the people don't follow the instructions, we have to reject the ballots to protect the integrity of the system. And that's just the way we run the whole show.
But then you still have ballot tracks, which I didn't even know about until just this second, but it's available to every voter. Just like
Oh, yeah.
you have my chart from Orlando Hospital. It's a simple enough system in the world where they're going to text you, and why not enroll in it? And it's available, and it's another check and balance where we're not in a conservative state. We're not specifically going out of our way, and I'm not a conservative. I'm a capitalist, but I'm not really a conservative. But we're not going out of our way to preclude more liberal voters from voting. There's all these systems in place to be sure your vote is counted. There's all these systems in place to enable you to vote. Mail-in voting is a great system. I'm telling you right here on this podcast, your mail-in vote opportunity has expired. Call your local supervisor of elections and re-up that option just in case you are hospital bound for some reason during the time you would be standing in line otherwise. And then enroll in ballot tracks. Understand that you mailed in your vote, you're going to get a notification that your signature was verified according to the 8 verification steps that are just incredible that I didn't even know about. So, and that's really why we're here today, is to not to berate the point that there's this voter suppression movement and generally it affects only liberals, that there really is great systems in place in America. And it's right. That's exactly how I feel. And I'm on the wrong side of the fence when I make these arguments. Sometimes they want to run me. I need to run out the back door of a room, but it's okay. I'm okay. I got like big shoulders and elephant skin. I'm good with it all. But I love the fact that you took the time to do this show and explain all these systems in place. And I love the fact that I live in the state of Florida where we are the gold standard. I live in the county of Lake County where we are the gold standard of voter rights and voter opportunities, if you will.
Exactly right, Jeff. And, I look forward to the day when we quit attaching labels to somebody as conservative or liberal or this or that or the other. We're all Americans, and we need to evaluate the issues and evaluate the candidates and cast our vote for those whose values and ideas line up more closely with our own. And back to our original point, become an informed voter and make sure that you know about the issues and then go vote according to your convictions, your understanding of what that candidate stands for. And there's another key factor too that I think we need to keep in mind. And I'll use the marriage identification again comparison. I don't know of any married couple that's been married for 5 years or more that have not had a disagreement of one sort or another. And yet they found a way to get over that disagreement, whether it was she gave in or he gave in, or they mutually found a happy landing place or whatever. And just because a legislator or a congressman, congresswoman, just because a city council person votes against one idea that you really, really like, doesn't mean that they're no longer to be supported again. I could give you several instances where legislators voted one way on one issue that I disagreed with, but yet on several other issues, they voted the way I did agree with. So in the grand scheme of things, when it comes time to reelect that person, I need to weigh the number of pluses and minuses that I'm familiar with that person's track record. And you can always go look up their voting record on whatever it was, this issue or that issue, and find their voting record, and then create a scorecard. Is this person most likely to vote along the ideas that you support, or are they supporting someone of other ideas? And if so, then you might want to consider voting for another candidate. So don't think you have to agree with somebody 100% of the time. And if you don't agree with them 100% of the time, that they're no longer a valid candidate. You need to keep everything in perspective.
So building on that point, because I do just that, but I find politics interesting. But I do it also at the Supreme Court. I am pleasantly surprised by conservative justices' rulings often. And I say that frequently. Again, it's one of them things that seem to want to get me run out of a room. But it's the fact of the matter is that if you do take the time, it's interesting. It is interesting. If all you're going to do is drive past the billboard, like I said, that says no taxes on tips for servers, and you're going to vote for that guy because of that one billboard that just cannibalize. So he's or she is raising money. When that person sends that $20 to that candidate, that $20 is no longer going to St. Jude Children's Hospital. That's the only $20 they had to give that month. So when you're doing that, when that's your way of saying I'm an American, and I believe in the all in bet in America and the way of life. But when you're doing just that and not doing what Alan's saying, not researching your candidates, you're not really being a informed voter, and that's what you need to be today. You're not really giving the system the respect it deserves.
And I would encourage everybody to take some time, sit down and read the U.S. Constitution. There's two very good websites that I love. They just have a plethora of information about the founding era, the founding fathers, and their correspondence, and all that sort of stuff. One is called patriotacademy.com. Again, that's patriotacademy.com. The other is Wall Builders, WALLBUILDERS.com. And I know both those gentlemen, David Barton and Rick Green, both those websites have an abundance of information about the founding fathers and the original intent of our government and the Judeo-Christian biblical principles and morals and ethics upon which our foundation was built. We are not a democracy. We throw that term around frequently, but we are a constitutional republic. And that's the way they set it up, because democracies, there's never been a democracy that lasted very long. The average duration of a constitutional government across the world is only about 16 or 17 years. And our Constitution has been in effect for almost 250 years. Next year will be 250 since our nation was founded. The Constitution itself didn't come into being until 1789. But nevertheless, call it 250 years. And it's because of the detail that those men put into it as they were writing it. And for another factor is the writers of that document were men and women who prescribed to a biblical worldview far more frequently than they did a secular worldview. And that's there's multiple indications of the close parallel between biblical principles and the Constitution and the articles of that Constitution that can make head-to-head comparisons with them. And my personal belief is that's a big reason that our Constitution has held up. James Madison said our Constitution was clearly written to govern a moral and religious people, and it's unfit to govern any other. That's one of the reasons I feel that we have so much strife in our country today is we have such a large percentage of our population that no longer has a biblical worldview. And according to James Madison, our Constitution isn't appropriate to govern a non-biblical believing group of people. So there's some real thought nuggets to
that was something I really, yeah, I love it. I believe it. I have to unpack it too, but it's true though that is very much the reason that we are the system that's been in place for 250 years and the greatest system that's ever been in place, and that's why so many people want to be here today, and there's a lot of good reason for that.
yeah.
And I'm always thankful I'm here and living in this place called America, because it's a beautiful thing. That day-to-day life is a beautiful thing.
We have to protect it, and there have been hundreds of thousands of men that have died on foreign soil. There were several men that died right here on this American continent to defend to get, number one, get our freedom from the British Crown, and then Civil War, a whole bunch of others that died right here. And one of the best things that we can do to honor those sacrifices is to make sure that we exercise our privilege of voting. I call it our responsibility to vote. Each of us has a responsibility as a good citizen to find out about those candidates, be an informed voter, and then make sure that you cast your vote.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something I keep telling people. Get to know, and your amendments too, not just your lawmakers, your amendments too.
Yeah.
The amendments in Florida can be complicated, and the propaganda that's placed on both, that's paid for by both sides, doesn't explain them. Get to really but
another handicap that we as a society have is too many of us are conditioned to the 30-second soundbite, and it's unfair that candidates have been reduced to making their positions known in a 30-second or less soundbite. You just can't explain some things in the depth that they need to be explained in that brief period of time.
So to that point, and I say it again, when Donald Trump spent 3.5 hours on the Joe Rogan show, he unpacked himself as a person. And I think it really made a difference in his election prospects, because I'm not going back. I'm not going to go into a tangent on this, but Kamala Harris was extremely vague, and there was an understanding it may be the better the devil you know, because we don't know what this person is talking about. She hasn't talked about anything. And and that was unfortunate for her, because I really did want to know more about her. And I made them well, I won't say it, but I voted for the person I preferred because of the red or the blue, but I would have liked that person to be a better candidate too. And
Joe, I find it interesting that palm tree behind you has been blowing the whole time we've been talking, and your hair still hasn't been messed up.
That is the magic of IT. That is Zoom and all their glory. And I got so many. Oh my God, your office is a mess. So I said, you know what? I'm on the beach today. I'm not anywhere near the office today.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I'm going to bow out if I may.
Yes, sir, Alan. You've been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Alan Hayes, Supervisor of Elections, Lake County, the premier voting place county in the country. Thank you for all your service and all your hard work and all your years of service. Thank you so much, Alan.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take care.
Have a great day, sir.